Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maciej Piotrowski and I am PhD student at the University of Warsaw. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. The title of my presentation is Boundary Between Airspace and Outer Space Selected Legal Issues. The development of science and technology raises the question of the delimitation of outer space in the light of applicable norms of international public law. This speech aims to describe the attempts made so far to determine a legally binding boundary between the atmospheric and extra-atmospheric space, and to answer the question about the necessity to separate these two spaces. The first part of the speech describes the attempts made so far in this regard by the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. It then explains the different ways to delimit outer space, including a spatial and functional approach. The second part presents the lege ferenda conclusions on solving the problem of delimitation in the light of the development of new forms of activity in outer space, so-called new space. The delimitation of outer space is a very important issue that has been repeatedly undertaken by the United Nations. This matter was discussed from the beginning of so-called space age. Despite this, so far, this problem has not been solved at the boundary between atmospheric space and extra-atmospheric space has not been established in a binding manner. It seems that this results not only from the divergence of positions, but also from the lack of will to resolve the question of delimiting the two areas. For this reason, there is no consistent position on this matter in the literature. Such a delimitation is often perceived as possibly risking running ahead of technical developments which may reduce such legal border lines to irrelevance. Moreover, the delimitation of space limits state sovereignty, as it determines the upper limit of state sovereignty in the airspace to a certain altitude. These problems are also exacerbated by the fact that international aviation law does not define airspace. The literature usually indicates that there is extra-atmospheric space above 100-110 kilometers. Practical problems in the application of an appropriate legal system, international aviation or space law, create a space between the altitudes of 80-100 kilometers because in this sphere, new commercial forms of activity take place, such as recently popular suborbital flights. For the first time, the limitation issue was noticed at the Ad Hoc Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space session, which reported on its work to the United Nations General Assembly at its 14th session. At that time, it was assumed that the issue of the limitation of outer space is not so important, considering that as a result of the uniform practice of states, there will be a common law norm in this area in the future. Similar conclusions were drawn in 1962 at the session of Legal Subcommittee of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. At subsequent sessions of this body, delegates of states discussed and continue to discuss various possibilities of delineating the boundary between the atmospheric and extra-atmospheric space, which did not lead to the adoption of binding conclusions. The doctrine indicates two basic approaches to the issue of space delimitation: spatial and functional approaches. Following the spatial approach, a horizontal line should be drawn at a certain height that would indicate the lower limit of outer space and the upper limit of airspace. So far, no dividing line has been defined at a specific height that is accepted by all states. Within the framework of this approach, various theories are distinguished, such as the theory identifying outer space with airless space, the Kármán line, the aeronautical ceiling theory, the theory of the lowest perigee of the Earth's artificial satellites, the theory of effective sovereignty and technical possibility of use, theories of division on zones, and many, many others. The Kármán line theory, which presupposes a border at an altitude of approximately 100-110 kilometers, is commonly accepted. The theory of the lowest perigee of artificial satellites on Earth, assuming a border at an altitude of approximately 95-110 kilometers, is also gaining popularity. The spatial approach assumes that objects should be classified according to two legal orders: international aviation law and international space law, depending on the space in which they will be located at a given time. The functional approach, on the other hand, focuses on examining the purpose, the nature of a given activity, and answering the question of whether a given activity can be qualified as space activity. The problem here is the question of clearly defining what exactly determines the cosmic nature of a given activity. According to this approach, an object will be classified as a space object regardless of its altitude. It seems that in the future, the boundary between air and space will be drawn at an altitude of between 85 and 100 kilometers. The lack of delimitation of outer space causes problems related to the selection of the appropriate regime of international aviation law or space law concerning various forms of activity in the near space. Commercialization of space activities brings with it new legal challenges. Space, one reserved only for states, today becomes a space for private endeavors. The lack of delineation of the boundary between air and space, and the lack of definition of basic concepts such as space object, cause problems with the legal assessment of specific cases. All this means that it is necessary to adapt the international space law to modern needs and clarify the issue of delimitation. Thank you for your cooperation. Thank you very much. Hope to see you in person next time. Thank you.